When I was reading past interviews with you and past profiles, words that continue to come up are things like, femininity and prettiness. And I wonder, eccentricity doesn't often come up, which is something that perversely comes up with most other designers when you read profiles. And would you say you are eccentric?
I think I've got an element of eccentricity. I don't think it's necessarily something that comes through in my work. And it's probably not been applicable to the places I've worked.
What were you like as a child?
I lived just outside Oxford, so had quite an idyllic childhood, I'd have to say. My father, he was in the Air Force, so he was travelling a lot, so kind of absent and back on weekends. Although, when he was back on the weekend, it used to be, we'd be doing tons of things together, whether or not it was out visiting something or we had lots of animals, horses and dogs, and he'd be, helping us to rise at the trot on the horses, and all those sort of things. So
Sounds perfect.
That was really great, and it was quite. We shared a house, and one half was our family, and the other half was my grandmother.
Right.
So, I did have those role models like my grandmother, and I know that's something that's always quite often said about designers.
Yeah.
We'll talk about, and she was a chic lady, but a chic lady in the countryside outside of Oxford. So it was Windsmore suits, nice little twin sets and things like that. But from an early age, I always knew I was very observant, very aware of how things looked and just aesthetics in general, and not just related to fashion. It could be antiques or homes or anything. And there we used to have formed like a little collection of antiques when I was about 9, which I used to buy in the local antique shop that was actually in the village. And I dropped by there after school and go in, and it was run by two old ladies, and just spend hours in there talking to them and looking at things, and then getting pocket money together and going to make really small purchases, and some of them I still have today. So I know I just definitely had a curious mind, and that was something that was very much encouraged by my parents, and I feel very lucky to have had them, because when I sort of realised in myself that yes, I did want to pursue fashion, there was never any resistance from them about it.
And what was that point where that happened that decided fashion?
Probably quite early on, maybe around early teens or something like that. And at that time, then my mother said, "It's way too boring out here for you and your sister. We're going to move into the city centre of Oxford." So then we did move into Oxford. I just really loved being there, but also so some of my parents' friends were the academics from the university, and they were pushing their children, into medicine or literature or whatever. But my sister and I never encountered that. So once we knew that we wanted to go to art college, it was really embraced, and we were given all the encouragement we needed.
And do you remember the first piece of fashion that you ever made?
Well, again, a bit of a cliche, but sort of making dresses for dolls of my sisters, and I was talking about that with my sister the other day, and she said, "No, but that's all wrong. They weren't her dolls. They were actually my dolls." So my parents, they didn't mind the idea of me having dolls and just playing with those, because think about a young boy who's interested in fashion, and when he sees a Barbie doll,
Yeah, exactly.
all those frills and everything, it's kind of quite appealing. So
it's interesting though, because it seems like you could have gone in many directions. It feels like you could have gone into interior design, or you could have, and I'm interested.
Yeah, definitely, or antiques. That was something that was really appealing to me. Film as well, I kind of considered that.
Why did fashion win in a way? Were you starting to read magazines? Was it just the clothing?
Definitely, yeah, because if you consider this was kind of mid-80s. So I think fashion in London, it was a really appealing time. at that point. So yeah, and there's just something that came together there, and I decided it was fashion. Also from quite an early age, I used to go up to London. My parents used to let just a friend and I go up to London on the bus and spend the day there, and I was just thinking back on it, how lucky I was to have experienced that. I mean, if I was a parent now, I don't think I'd allow a 13-year-old to go up to London on their own, but I think it was something that really allowed me to grow and see the world. And that's one of the reasons I don't think, you know, I was happy to then leave, go to London, to St Martin's, and then beyond that to go to London, to go to Paris and work there, and even now just to, after 20 years, have a big life change and go to set up in New York.
And tell me more about that process of kind of aspiring to move to London and moving to London. I'm interested in, before you've cited people like Catherine Hamnett, you were very interested in their work.
Yeah, no, completely. And I can remember, you know, I used to go up to London when she had her sample sales and stay in line for hours to get in, and also then Brown's on South Molton Street. You know, that was a mythic place, and I can remember the first time again when I went up there and just entering the store and just looking at things and being really excited about it. And that was all before I was even on foundation course. Also when I was before I did my foundation course, you know, I wrote to some designers and asked if I could do placement. So
do you remember who you wrote to? One
was to Pam Hogg and the other one was to John Galliano. And I went up to London. I stayed with a friend while I was doing, I think I did 2 weeks with Pam Hogg and 2 weeks with John. Obviously they were quite small companies, so it had to be quite hands-on.
Do you think that kind of set in motion almost straight away, that idea that you would always work for someone? I wondered where that idea of not having your own label came.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about that. I think it's probably just how it panned out in a way.
Was it ever a consideration?
Not really, but when I was at the Royal College, for example, there with 2 other fellow students, we really decided to work in a different way, and we did a collaboration. It was with John Ray, who's now at Dunhill, and April Crichton. We decided to do a collaboration. We didn't do an individual show, so that was kind of quite different at the time, because in general, you know, people would use that final collection at St Martin's just to promote themselves, but we wanted to do this collaboration. We felt our work worked well together and touched different sort of people. And even at that time, the collection that I designed was much more towards a more sophisticated woman and quite a mature woman as well, even to the extent that we did all our own castings and found our models. We found sponsorship as well. We got sponsorship from Pernod. So that, in a way, how we put that together and how we looked for a backer would have been, you know, the most logical step would have been to set up our own business on leaving college. But maybe that didn't happen because John and I, we went on to the Royal College to continue studying. But yeah, it would have definitely made sense to have formed a company out of that, but it was never really thought about or spoken about. So I guess in retrospect, it wasn't really something I was really thinking about. Also at that time, all the French houses had real appeal to me. And we used to go, as students, we used to go over to Paris to attend the fashion shows, which was completely brilliant. And we saw amazing shows and an amazing time for fashion, I think, if you consider it was when Yoji and Com were really just hitting the scene.
Do you remember any standout shows?
Oh God, there was. I have to say some of the Gaultier shows at that period were absolutely fantastic. There was one where the models were on a moving conveyor belt and they didn't walk; they just walked and stood, struck a pose on this moving conveyor belt. And
fantastic.
you know, at that time when you were there witnessing that show, you thought you were at the centre of the earth, basically. Much as I loved everything that was happening in London, like Catherine Hamnet and Body Map and Lee Barry and all of that scene, but that level of sophistication that you could find in Paris really appealed to me. Again, to kind of show my driven side, when I was at the Royal College, I had a Saturday job in the Conran shop, and at one point Christian Lacroix came in shopping with his wife, and his company had just been going for a couple of years at that point, and he was, you know, he was everything to me. I just loved that whole look. So I just thought, I'm not letting this opportunity pass me by. So I went and spoke to him and explained I was a student at the Royal College and would there be any way of coming to work for him. We were doing an internship. So he said, yeah, send me some work and a letter and we'll see what we can do. So, you know, on Monday there was a letter in the post with an example of my work, and then a couple of months later I got a call from the directress of the Haute Couture salon asking me to come over and work with them. I went over during the Haute Couture, and I had, it was best, I illustrate quite nicely and have quite a good hand, so that's what had appealed to them in the work that I'd sent. So what I had to do is illustrate the couture collection, because Christian would do the designs himself, obviously, but then through the fitting process, sometimes the original design to how it was shown and represented on the catwalk would change. So I had to do kind of an illustration of how it was shown, plus put fabric samples on, and this was a big dossier that was in the couture salon for the sales afterwards, and then I also designed variations around some of the outfits. So if a jacket had been presented with pants, I'd draw it with skirts, and some of the evening dresses I'd adapt them for wedding dresses. So, and all of this because I had to know what was happening in the fittings, so I could do an accurate drawing. I just had to basically sit alongside him, getting these illustrations done. So it was such a learning curve to watch someone like Christian work, just to witness Monsieur Lesage coming in and opening embroideries and presenting them to Christian. You know, that's something that I'll always remember and feel privileged to have been part of. Just the fabrics he was working with, the combinations of colours, everything was incredible. You know, sitting watching a fitting on Mary Cesnick, you know, it was kind of incredible. So and they invited me back 4 or 5 times to always do that same job.
Was the realities of Paris as brilliant as the idea of Paris that you'd had as a boy in London? Yeah,
I'd have to say it pretty much lived up to it. On leaving the Royal College, I didn't go straight to Paris.
No.
I did a short period at Iceberg in Italy, and that was kind of quite a strange experience in some ways. I knew it wasn't where I wanted to be already, because it wasn't in one of the main cities. It was on a small town on the Adriatic coast. So we did definitely feel quite cut off there. The thing that made it quite pleasant was just some other people from my college ended up there. So we were kind of a little group. It was near the beach and we had motorinos. So we were kind of living the
like
Italian Riviera life. But I really knew I wanted to get back to Paris. You know, I felt elated to really arrive in Paris and be working there and on Boulevard Saint-Germain. And Sonia was very much part of the design process at that point. So, you know, having witnessed Lacroix work, then to be alongside Sonia and observe her, that was very, very inspirational as well.
What is femininity to you? Is it something that's kind of unexplainable, or?
Well, let's try and explain that. But
tough question.
you know, I think it can mean different things for different women. I don't necessarily think it means being dressed up in ruffles and lace. You know, obviously that's a more first degree sort of version of it. I think it comes through women who feel comfortable with themselves, who can express themselves quite openly and comfortably, and I think there's definitely sort of certain silhouettes for me that define it. I think when you can do something that's quite body conscious but doesn't feel vulgar in any way, I still definitely get a buzz when I look at some pieces and think, yeah, that's exactly how I saw it, it's exactly what I wanted, and you know, have a real sense of pride.